to the Boomerang podcast. We have our returning guest, Kris Jurski. Kris, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. You're the founder of ThePeoples'Audit. Doing great work down in southern Florida, or just Florida. Sure. Are you just doing Florida in general? You're looking at all stuff in Florida.
Yeah, we've done the whole state of Florida, and now we've expanded into Texas, Georgia, North Carolina, and other states are already lined up. We just got to get them piped in.
Well, you came on the show. I mean, you gave us the whole rundown. I mean, maybe give us a quick refresher, kind of what was going on there, you know, the whole Red Belly Road stuff. And then I'd like to kind of hear what you've been up to lately.
Sure. I started the software right after the 2020 election. Essentially, my background being my family's from Poland, as well as marrying a Venezuelan woman, I was really keened into the fact of somebody being able to lose their country all over an election. So I went to work trying to figure out what was going on, because this was a little bit different than what we were doing in Venezuela, or what they were doing in Venezuela, but it still kind of had the same kind of echoes with the media and the politicians saying, oh no, best election ever. So I built a piece of software to review that. And my background is I work with small businesses to scale their companies. And along the way, I would have to find fraud and waste and systemize things. So that was really just a toolbox that I've built up over the years that I could quickly find problems. And one of the things that we would typically do is just snapshot analysis, where we'd watch for things to change that are not supposed to change. Like, for example, payroll systems. If you paid something and had a bank statement, you shouldn't see that bank statement change like 2 months after it's reconciled. That was a problem we had in some of the companies trying to hide what they were embezzling. So I applied that same kind of technology to the voter rolls, and we built this way of basically comparing the voter rolls month to month. And that's where we started to find some amazing, startling discoveries.
And that includes Red Belly Road, right?
Yeah, Red Belly Road was one of the things that really launched what we had to do, because we found that on a small scale. Essentially, we had a whole street get changed to a fictitious street in the middle of the primary election in 2020 or 2022. I'm sorry. 37 people just basically showed up on this fictitious street for just about a month. And then they were flipped back to their normal house address. And when we went and canvassed that street after the election, we purposely waited till like the Saturday after the election. No one had any earthly idea what we were talking about. No one knew what that road was. Nobody asked for the road to be changed. But surprisingly, the lady at the end of the street that was the only one that had her voter information card actually delivered, she pulled out the card, and she was just as startled as us to find that Red Belly Road was actually printed on the card. So that proved that this was actually happening, because right after that, it got switched back to 12th Street.
Right. And then you move over to, these public-private partnerships. I mean, we talk a lot about the machines on this show, you know, how corrupt the machines are. But I mean, it's almost like, and there was something you had said in an interview with, I think it was Roger Stone, but something to the effect of these public-private partnerships are basically bribes, just bribing mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much going on there. Just to unpack, I did a recent Substack article on Friday that I just keyed in on what was happening in Florida. And I mean, there's so much more, but just on the surface level, we have people that are both, like, for example, Mark Earley up in Leon County. He's married to the head of elections at a private company that prints ballots for 2/3 of the state. Right. And what we found is that this whole thing with undeliverable mail generates an enormous amount of waste. It's millions of dollars that they're spreading around, both into the landfills, as well as paying off the postage or the post office to pay for this return service, as well as the printers that just keep on printing this stuff that's just going to go into garbage. So you can see that there's all this stuff that they're not interested in fixing the problem. And right now, where everybody's wallets are getting tighter, they're just sitting there throwing money around like they earned it somehow.
Right. Yeah, they say that the elections with the machines, everything is so much cheaper. It's like, I beg to differ. It seems like things are getting much more waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah, the machines bring in a whole different angle to it too, because if you look at how much money they spend, they don't even really own these machines. If you look into their contracts, they lease them. And it's like the perfect world where they don't own the machines, so they can't test anything or look at them or even install any software on them. But the reality is that we have to pay for them to be stored. Like if you were leasing something at like a Home Depot or something for a weekend project, when you get done that weekend project, you drop it off at Home Depot for someone else to use.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
In our situation, we're paying for these huge now air conditioned facilities to be built because all of this stuff has to be stored in between 2-year elections. So, Palm Beach County just recently had to move to a new facility, which now is like a football field that they have to store all this paper and basically in machines, all in air conditioned facilities in Florida. You can imagine what the electricity bill on that building is.
Insane. Yeah, absolutely insane. I heard you talking a little bit about the Lake County ballots, how they're going to potentially bring in a grand jury there to look at it. Do you think that's where maybe a group like Tactical Civics could come in and utilize the 12-man jury?
I've been extremely curious about the grand jury process, but to be honest with you, I don't know much about it. I've had a couple people that I've interacted with, but my background's not in law. It's absolutely, basically, it sounds amazing if we could pull it off that way, because ultimately I don't see any participation in the current legal process. I believe we have to go back to something. And from what I've read about the history of the grand jury and common law, that sounds essentially what we founded on. That is essentially our founding law, that where our communities basically got together. That's the whole idea behind a jury and everything else. So I really think that there's something there. I just don't know much about it.
Because I've spoken to Bill Ogden. He works with Tactical Civics, and it seems to me like it's very plausible that maybe the way we root out this corruption is very simply get a jury of your peers, 12 of them, right? It's totally constitutional. We set them up, bring whatever charges need to be brought. Right? If they're found guilty, you get them out of office, you give them whatever penalty is required, right? My legalese is limited, but it just seems like a very plausible idea. And that's the way Bill kind of positioned it to me, was that Tactical Civics, I think, is going to catch up with people like you at a certain point. Everybody's going to start to intersect with it.
Yeah.
And that's where I think we're going to start making some gains in taking back our counties.
Yeah, because the first thing is that the officials have no interest in investigating and finding the fraud as it is right now. Right. So citizens had to step up and do things like we're doing right now with both the software and the people on the ground actually finding it. So that's the first step. And then the second step would be to actually do something with the evidence. Right now, the main reason I went to the Republican assemblies is really to put the political pressure on these people to understand that, hey, look, your job is not guaranteed. We have people that can run against you if we find out you're corrupt and need to be replaced. The other side of it is the legal angle of it and the grand jurial process. I mean, at the end of the day, something has to be done to bring justice to this system. Something has to be put on a check, because these people are running essentially amok, thinking that they can do anything, because they are getting away with a lot. But as the spotlight comes down on them, I think that's probably the worst thing that they fear, because they've had relatively anonymity through this whole process, and the news covers for them and makes them seem like they're saints, when in reality, if you pull back the sheet, it's rotten.
Yeah, these people are disgusting. What are you working on now? What kind of projects are you working on at the moment?
Well, we're going back and forth between basically Texas, Georgia, and North Carolina that we just recently set up, and we're trying to get the word out. Probably the most startling thing in Georgia is their voter rolls are growing about 50,000 people per month. And there's hardly any cleanup being done on that at all. We loaded about 4 months of data starting in December of last year, and just started to find some trends. They got some really bad voter rolls, a lot of dirty addresses there. I think there was close to about 1 million addresses that are bad just in Georgia, which, when you think about it to their size, is pretty bad shape. North Carolina is also seeing some spikes in their monthly voter rolls. Like, for some strange reason, they're getting spikes of, excuse me, it's called unaffiliateds, or NPAs. These are people that have no interest in politics, supposedly, but somehow they're outpacing people that are registering as Republican or Democrat. It never made sense to me. Why would they be registering people that absolutely say, I'm not interested in a political party and I'm not interested in politics?
Right. I mean, my whole thing is, like, I don't see how you can even have an election in 2024. Right. This stuff is not going to disappear. I mean, what do you see happening in 2024? I mean, my guess is we don't even have an election. I don't see how he
I
could.
mean, I wish I was a fortune teller. I don't know what's going to happen, but the thing for me in my mind that I just basically became resolute on it is that all we can do is prepare for the system that needs to take place. So as I mean, in my businesses, I call them bridge building. I mean, I walked into companies that were an absolute disaster, and what we would do is just build what needs to be there, and eventually you would cut the ribbon, and now everybody can take the track that is established over the river. But the key here is that we just can't sit around and complain about it, because it's not going to fix it, and they're just going to keep the status quo as long as they can. If there's an alternative that's existing, then we could basically take that alternative. At the end, I see all of it coming together. I see people working on the grand jury process, trying to figure out the legal side of it. I see people that are figuring out the security aspects of it, the process and procedures of how elections can be done. People experimenting with hand count ballots. It's really amazing, because it's truly American. You know what I mean? Like, everybody basically dropped, including me, dropped being an entrepreneur and ran in here to try and figure out how we can solve this problem. And all this intuitiveness and innovations coming now back to the election system. For me, the elections are linchpins. You know what I mean? There's something that reverberates across every category. If we don't have elections, the reason I watched Venezuela when I watched it, and I said that would never happen in the United States. And I went in telling my family, like lecturing them about how America was so great for having this peaceful transition of power, even though we didn't agree with everybody all the time. And when you watch the current news and watch all the protests that are going on right now, it's like, where can I just go back to like watching Donahue in the 70s? Like, that's what I want to do, where I'm sitting there listening to communists argue with with economists and basically talk about how capitalism's better and arguing over tax rates. You know what I mean? Like, but it's all peaceful. Everybody's just sitting there on the stage arguing with one another.
It's wild. It's
Yep.
wild. We're a gold company, Boomerang podcast, I'm really a gold broker by day, podcaster by night. But what do you see happening in the financial system? I'd love your insights. I mean,
that's probably the one thing that keeps me up at night. I don't see how we're going to get through this with the current fiat system. I really don't see that. Like, that's the one thing that is inevitable based on what happened in Venezuela. I mean, if you just look at Venezuela, it's like watching a ball roll off the table. It's going to fall. I mean, unless somebody acts on it. And even if somebody acts on it, I don't personally know how you can reverse what damage has been done to this fiat system. All we can do is, much like I was mentioning about the economy or the elections, is build an alternative. We have to get back to sound money. And I'm a firm believer gold and silver has to come back. I don't know what's going to be around that. There's so much innovation with that too, that maybe there's some blockchain that interacts with gold and silver. But we have to get back to sound metal, because this whole thing of fiat is just, I mean, like, if you watch what's going on, there's just one word that comes to mind. It's called boundaries. We have no idea what boundaries are anymore, between people rushing across the borders, people basically printing money to infinity. They can't figure out if they're a man or a woman. I mean, that's essentially the same thing that's just running through. We got to get back to understanding boundaries, sovereignty, private property, tangible assets, meaning I'm holding this in my hand. It's not imaginary. Like, it just, I don't know. I could probably talk about this topic all day, but that's really, I don't see this turning out really well with the current stock market and the fiat currency we have.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S., right, as you know, the U.S. was turned into a corporation in 1871.
Yep.
Right. Maybe what Trump's doing is he bankrupted the U.S. corporation, and maybe at the end of this, he's just going to hand it back to him and say, thank you very much.
Yeah, the funny thing is the amount of bankruptcies that guy has gone through, he at least understands how to navigate them and understands what can be done. I read his books, and I was actually really inspired, because most people would just be pounded into the earth going through what he went through, and he actually was able to surf through those situations and actually turn out something better on the other end. And he's absolutely right, because at the end of the day, if you're an innovator, you're creating value, you should be rewarded. And that we have a whole country of people filled like that just need to be unleashed. Like right now, it's just all about basically closing us and keeping us chained down. That's why we're falling apart. But I'm positive that what can come, but I don't see that positive light at the end of the tunnel without having to go through some really hardships. Because the other side of it is that people are spoiled. They have no earthly idea. Like if they've never been outside of this country, they have no earthly idea how the rest of the world works. And they're about to get a lesson. That's all I can say.
Yeah, it's got to be a learning experience, right? How do you wake up the people? I mean, I think you have to hit them financially, right? I think it's got to come from the banking system. I mean, people didn't really start complaining about Biden until gas prices shot up to $6, $7 a gallon.
Yeah.
Right. That's when people actually spoke up and were like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah.
Right. So I could see a scenario where, I mean, I talked to Juan O'Savin. You probably know Juan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Juan says that, you know, Trump doesn't really even need to win the presidency. This country is going to go into bankruptcy, and it'll be at that point that Trump walks this country through bankruptcy. And I see kind of the pros and cons to it. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I don't know how it's going to happen, but the thing that I tell people that we need to focus on more importantly is the locals. So what happens at the federal level with Trump, in my opinion, I've always thought, going back to a constitutional republic, the presidency is in charge of negotiating tariffs, running the military. He or she should have no basically input on my day-to-day life. I shouldn't worry about it too much. And I'm sure that if he gets back into that position, he's fully capable of doing that. But what I'm afraid of is the local economies and the local piece, both with our sheriffs, our mayors, our governors. That's really where you have to worry about. Like, look what's going on in New York and California right now. And that's a pretty good indicator of what can happen in your state if you're not careful. I mean, that New York's a perfect example of like Venezuela. In the United States already here. They've weaponized the justice system. They're attacking their own citizens. Criminals run amok and try to basically feed your family, continue to work, and operate in like normal status quo in that kind of environment. So to me, I've always focused on the local side of it. I pray that Trump gets back in office, and I'm fighting like crazy to make sure the elections are fair to get that. But I mean, to me, I just see that he doesn't need any help up there. Like, he's fully capable of running the federal government and cleaning house. Yes. But for us down here at the local level, myself included, like, what am I going to do if my town falls into chaos because my sheriff and all the deputies just run off because they're getting overrun? I mean, that's the kind of a worst case scenario that we really should consider. Yeah, because a perfect example is if the economy collapses and sheriffs and bureaucrats aren't getting paid, or do you think they're going to run 911, or are they just going to go home and try to feed their families? Like, exactly. That's a real question that we should all basically ponder.
And I think with all this, the people's mindset has to change. Like, you know, before Trump ran, we always would think of people with, you know, political experience. Mm-hmm. What a bunch of bullshit, right? Yeah. People, I had Bob Branch in here yesterday. Mm-hmm. You know, Bob Branch, you know, super successful guy. He's not running because he wants the money, or he's got skills. You know, Don Hyatt wants to be the county recorder here in Maricopa, right? You need an IT guy. You need somebody with those credentials, somebody like yourself to run that type of position, right? And we need people that don't need the paycheck, that don't even want the paycheck. They just want to make the change. And I think that's where the general public has to wake up. And I think something like a banking crisis could very well trigger something like that. That's why I do gold and silvers, because I'm a big believer. I think, you know, U.S. coinage, American gold and silver, American Eagles. I think that plugs you right into a constitutional system. We have cowboys down here in Arizona that literally, you want a bale of hay. Mark Fincham was telling me about this. He says, if you want a bale of hay, you go throw him a 1 ounce silver eagle, you got your bale of hay.
Yep.
So maybe we'll see a scenario where, you know, the dollar starts, you know, hyperinflating, starts losing value very tremendously, and people have this off ramp into, you know, gold and silver, maybe some of the cryptos, right? What are your opinions on the cryptocurrencies? I'd be curious.
I've kind of missed the boat. I was looking at Bitcoin. I kicked myself over and over for this. I watched Bitcoin back in, I think it was 2007 or something like that. And it was like $12, and trying to talk to a Forex friend of mine that was like, I don't even know what Bitcoin is. And then the next day it was $72. So I was like, oh, I guess I missed that boat. And I was like, I'll never live that one down. missing buying that opportunity. But the thing that has always been intriguing to me about blockchain is essentially the general ledger side of it, because I build accounting systems, do accounting on or forensics on accounting and things like that. To me, that is absolutely brilliant. To me, I personally think that if I wanted to fix the problems, we would all be on cash and the government would be entirely on Bitcoin. So like every public company and every public institution should be entirely run on Bitcoin, because there would be no way to cook the books. Your books would be instantly transparent based on the blockchain. And that, I think that would be probably the most revolutionary thing I've seen. But as far as my personal opinion, I want something tangible. I want something that I can hold in my hand and know it's a value. Just like you said, again, I really think that, again, the importance of that is going to be, is it when, I mean, it's just a matter of when, not if. When that does happen, when we have a financial crisis, you're going to have to hold something in your hand. And when we watch what happened in Venezuela, it was essentially a black market immediately introduced. They tried to outlaw dollars. They couldn't. People they were using dollars because the money there was useless. And I'll never forget, like, these blocks, like if you can imagine like a block like this big tied together with rubber bands of $100 bills. Okay. And people were putting those on the scales, multiple blocks of $100 bills. And they were weighing that because it took more time to count the money than to just weigh it. Right. That's what's coming for us with this fiat, because if they keep on printing the way they're printing, it's just inevitable. It's Weimar Republic. I mean, there's countless books written on this stuff, happen across the whole world. We should be really basically not think that it's impossible to happen here. It's just math, as far as I'm concerned.
History repeats itself, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you'd agree, but we're in the middle of the communist revolution.
Yeah.
No one wants to talk about it. So it's already happening. Like you pointed out, the college campuses. I mean, how ridiculous is this?
Oh yeah, and I mean that's the whole thing. But like you can see that it's all manufactured. Like when you look, my example, whenever I was in the Tea Party days back then, was just look at people's signs. If you see perfectly printed signs and truckloads of them, you have to ask yourself, who paid for that? When you go to an authentic grassroots protest, it's usually somebody went to the local store and basically wrote on a marker, or nobody has that kind of money to sit there and make all these beautiful signs and print this up. So you know that they're manufactured. Plus, the other thing is that whenever you typically see a protest that we're like Republicans are at, nobody's wearing masks. Everybody's showing their face. But when you see these radicals, basically they're all masked. It's the same thing as Antifa or whatever you want to call it. Basically, they're not representative of us. I can tell you that they're not the people of their communities. That's for sure.
They're just changing uniforms, right? It's always the same people. It's, it was BLM who burned down, whatever city that was a couple of years back, right? Now they're on the college campuses, committing acts of violence, and then they want to pass this anti-Semitism bill, which I think is probably one of the most scary pieces of legislation you could possibly have. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't understand it. The first thing that they basically pointed out is that like the New Testament essentially would be that you wouldn't be able to quote the New Testament because it would be anti-Semitic. I don't know where we're going here, because they keep on prodding and they keep on pushing to see how much we're going to take. And I feel that people are getting to the breaking point. Not only that, it's just that you also have to start seeing that, like when I first started this whole work, because of what I went through in Venezuela, I immediately suspected everybody in government office as being in on this. Most people were like, oh, we were hacked by China and things like that. Because of what I saw in Venezuela, I knew right away that you just can't run into an election. Most normal people would be like, hey, wait a minute, something's bad going on there. And not to say that everybody in the government today is a criminal, but you either know it's happening and you're not acting because you're trying to hold on to your pension or your job, or you're involved with it. That's the way I see it, because you're consenting to this happening. Okay. I made a decision early on that I will not consent to this. I got thrown out. My kids got thrown out of the public school or my private school because I didn't consent to the masks. And I started to realize is that the more you consent, the more you give them authority. You have to stand up and say, no, this is not right. You're not doing the right thing here, and start fighting back everywhere you see it, including in your offices or in your business offices or government offices. And then this stuff would get shut down within a couple weeks if people just stood up, because we outnumber these people. That's all. We're essentially being bullied. Like, if you think about it, this is all about like bully just sitting there poking you in the chest, seeing how far he can push you.
And what's crazy to me is that these politicians who are on the dole somewhere, I mean, they have to be. We saw payments being made from FTX to some of these guys, right? You probably heard about that. I mean, don't these people have to know that they're selling out their country? Like, what are you going to do with that money in a Venezuela? What are you going to do with that money you just?
I mean, they thought the same thing in Venezuela, and like watching them, their standard of living was above California when that revolution all happened. And then fast forward to 10 years later, they can't walk the streets. Their family members are getting murdered and basically ODing on drugs. They're literally living in hell. And I mean, I do believe this is a spiritual battle, because you are literally accepting hell. Like, you are creating hell on earth the moment you go along with this. If you essentially don't consent with this and you fight back and basically say no, then you're at least not going along with this. But you consenting to it is the worst thing in the world, because essentially, like, if you think that your money, like, I mean, I watched people that were in government work, because I used to do stuff back in the early 2000s, talk about that they were going to have $90,000 or $100,000 pensions when they retired, right around this time frame. And I would snicker to myself, like, because I knew what was coming with the fiat, and I'm like, you really think that 90,000? Because the one thing that I do remember is I was like probably 10 years old. My great uncle used to sit there and complain at the dinner table. He's like, man, bread is 50 cents. He goes, when I was getting my pension, I thought it was going to be 5 cents. And I would laugh as a little kid thinking, what's the big deal? 50 cents. But to him, that was a 10-fold increase compared to what he was banking on to retire on. So he had to move back in with family, and he was literally poor in his last years. I don't even think he had enough money to bury himself because of his pension. That's what's coming for all of them. So they think that they're going to be high on the hog and living the life. And I see them all the time. They're out there buying boats, and I can tell you right now, nobody's going to buy those boats, because when Venezuela collapsed, no one had money to buy anything. Those nice cars, those mansions that you had, nobody wanted that. All they wanted was food. That's it. And unless you're a farmer, you're not making anything, because no one's going to trade you anything, because those. I mean, I remember seeing like these beautiful mansions by the water. It was called La Margarita in Venezuela. Perfectly white beach, like you would think about Miami, and these are probably like $10 million a pop. They were all basically moved in by squatters, and people were like fishing, and there's garbage everywhere now, and they're just fishing off the beach because they're more interested in the fish that are in the ocean than the house that's behind them. No one cares about that.
Yeah, there's three people in this world that I thank: military, truckers, and farmers.
Yeah.
You know, you'll be driving down
include those truckers.
You know, honk the horn when you're a kid.
You definitely have to, because we wouldn't have food on the shelf if it wasn't for them.
Yeah, people I think need to establish some appreciation again for these professions, because I mean, you know, if you don't have farmers, I mean, look what they're doing overseas. They're trying to get rid of farming.
Yeah.
Right. It's outrageous. You see these protesters, similar to the ones you see on these, you know, Columbia, NYU campuses. Mm-hmm. They're literally sitting there trying to make a case as to why we should no longer have farming. How farming is detrimental to society, and you're sitting there saying to yourself, like, "Holy shit!"
I'm just waiting for them to bring out the punch bowl. That's all. It's just like, guys, it's another Jonestown. This is a suicide cult. Like, I don't know what else.
Suicide cult. and who said it? Somebody said it great. They said, I forgot who said it, but it's a fantastic quote. They said, the people I'm most scared of are the people that are the do-gooders who want to force you to do something out of goodwill. Those are the scariest people.
As they said, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah. It couldn't be truer. And then my last question, and I know it's kind of a controversial subject, but Q, you're a technical guy.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of it? Do you think it's real? Do you think it's a psyop? Do you think
I have to admit that I was pulled into a lot of it when I first started. And if it wasn't for Juan, I have to admit too, I was very depressed because I immediately went really dark thinking about the hell that Venezuela went through, specifically about all the people that got murdered and intimidated when they tried to speak out against the election. If it wasn't for people like Juan that came out and talked about that stuff, I get a chance to actually thank him personally one time when I saw him in Orlando. But like, if it wasn't for people like that to talk me off the ledge, basically, I was in a really dark place when that first all started. And seeing people like him have the courage to stand up and everything has been absolutely a must. So Q has its benefits too, because I can't think of a more successful ground campaign. Like I'm a marketing guy, so I always watch this kind of word of mouth viral type of thing. I have never seen anything so more successful and spread so fast across the whole country. I think that some of it's been infiltrated and twisted. So I don't know where we are now, like what's true and what's not. But I do know that there's people, there are good people that are actually fighting behind the scenes every day to make sure that we can basically keep our country together. That I know is a fact. Like it's the actual boards and people have been twisting it so much since 2000 or since 2020. I don't know what to think of it anymore, because it's like a lot of the stuff now today, personally, today is more along lines of keeping people complacent and thinking like this whole thing of trust the plan, eat the popcorn. That's the kind of stuff I think is actually to the detriment, because you really should be preparing and you really should be doing something.
Yeah. You don't want people being complacent. And what gave me a little bit of hope was I spoke to John Ritchie yesterday. Mm-hmm. I had him on the show, former CIA.
Yep.
And some of his comments kind of lined up with Scott Bennett's comments, which was a lot of people who were leaving the military didn't really actually leave the military. They may actually be forming kind of a paramilitary, or however you want to phrase it. So that at the right time, we do have, patriots, boots on the ground, people that can, maybe handle certain parts of the country, because we know, probably some cities are going to burn, same people that are at these protests. These are the people that are going to be out there, burning down, churches, burning down businesses, burning down buildings, homes. Right. So I do think, just from what I gather and the people I've listened to and spoken to, I do think that there is a military presence that's ready to come in on these people.
The other thing too is like, I mean, I've really had a more of a revaluation of the spiritual nature of everything that's been happening over the last couple of years. Absolutely. I used to tell people years ago that when you watch like a volcano or an earthquake, you always see the animals like run. And I used to raise horses too as a kid. Animals always knew a storm was coming and things like that. So just because there's not like a patch on your shoulder or something like that, spiritually, people are acting together because they know that something's coming. And I mean, having the military there, great. But the thing I know beyond a shadow of a doubt, because I've talked to people and I know them myself, I'm a veteran. There's people that, regardless of the uniform, they took an oath and they love their country, they love their family. They're going to stand up and do something and protect their communities. So that's the thing that gives me solace, because I mean, the when you're in the military, it's a brotherhood that you have for the rest of your life. If anybody else served, you immediately recognize that person. But you can't say that like everybody in the military is great. Like, look at these pictures now where they're sitting there dressed up as transvestites and wearing dog faces and everything. They're trying to demoralize us. But at the end of the day, the brothers and sisters I served beside, I know will be there when the proverbial poo hits the fan. That's what as they say.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you coming on. My two really good friends, one of which is Bill. Bill, you just saw, he's helping with the podcast. Mm-hmm. He's a Navy guy. Those are the people I want to surround myself with. One of my best friends is my friend Josh.
Yep.
Former Marine Corps. James, who owns the company, Midas,
Yep.
right? He's former Marine Corps. These are the people I want to associate with.
Yeah.
Like I don't debate these liberals anymore. I have no interest in a dialogue with them.
Yeah.
Like I just want whatever's going to happen, and I'll be ready for it. And I'm sure you will be too.
Well, we're going to have to deal with it one way or another because I mean, whatever's going to come, it's not going to be pretty. I don't know how. It's just going to be a matter of how long it lasts. That's the only thing I would hate for it to go on for years. I hope it's something that rip the Band-Aid off, get it over with, and move on with our lives.
It's going to take time. I listen to Juan on this topic, and it's probably going to take 4 or 5 years, according to Juan, to really start rebuilding this country.
Yep.
Get the forces of evil out of here, because they're never going to stop. Those guys are not going to go quietly.
Oh no, they're all in it. I mean, this is good versus evil.
Because I mean, even if Trump handed us a republic back, here you go, guys. Here's your republic. Everything's great again. We wouldn't even know what to do with it.
That's the whole thing. The one thing I will say about why I think that what's going through now, we are either in some kind of military op or at least a very basic, because I just remember basic training. They did this to us in basic training where they just put us in these scenarios where we were forced to work together or we perished, period. Like there was nobody coming to our rescue. You either work together or perish. And that's essentially where they churn out leaders. That crucible is where you have to basically do what you need to do. That's why I say, like, I don't know how it's going to last, but if people will stand up and take ownership of their local communities and do something locally, especially in your family. I mean, you can't get more like local than that. If you can't keep your family safe and fed through this process, you can't help your next door neighbors. So that's the whole thing. Like we all have to go back and basically become leaders, both in our families and our local communities.
Yeah, agreed. Well, it's an honor always having you on the show. I think your name will withstand the test of time and be in the history books for many centuries to come for what you're doing.
Appreciate it.
We salute you. And where can people find you?
Best place to go is my website, the-peoples-audit.org. You can also find me on Truth Social or Telegram under The People's Audit without the hyphens. And we've been also posting out the Substack, but if you go to my webpage, the links to the Substack are all there as well.
Perfect. Well, Kris, thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Salute you, brother.
Take care.